way forward to a robust evangelical ecclesiology in Asia is to mine the resources of the Christian tradition. This means essentially retrieving a theologically normative liturgy. The liturgy is where rites and their meanings cohere in the ancient practice of catechesis. So this is an excellent point that comes out in the chapter, but I can already hear some uh, objections or questions rising. So how would you see this in relation to attempts to be relevant, contextually aware, where churches seek to speak the language of the surrounding culture and not be like those irrelevant, stodgy old churches which uh, did speak to their context?
Yeah. But there are a few things in the question that I think I need to address separately. First, regarding the evangelical ahistorical approach to faith, I cannot agree with you more that it has no real sense of history. Yeah, many evangelicals have not much knowledge of their own history beyond their maybe the immediate precursor in the 19th century. Yeah, their understanding of who they are came largely from their early missionaries, who themselves are the product of para-church organizations and not from the mainline churches. Okay. And so many of them tend to treat tradition as a dirty word because they have no sense of a history. Yeah. They think of tradition as some fossilized practices that have been handed down unquestioningly from one generation to another generation that have no relevance at all to the life of the modern Christian. But tradition is in fact something living and dynamic, as Alistair McIntyre has pointed out in his works. Without a living tradition, without people engaging in certain beliefs and practices that are essential to the community and passing on down that to the next generation, without that kind of living tradition, then the church has no collective memory. And without collective memory, we lose our basic ecclesial identity. I may compare it to a person. Just as a person suffering from, let's say, dementia loses connection with other people and ultimately with himself or herself. Yeah. I think similarly, when the church loses its long-term memory, it usually ends up latching on to the latest fashion that happens to come along. Yeah. For some, it's what it means to be relevant. It explains why many evangelical charismatic churches are constantly mutating like the coronavirus. Yeah. Yeah. And, they will latch on to the latest thing, and before long, when they discover that it no longer works, they will latch on to a new thing, forgetting that, some of the new things that they had latched on to had been a revival of old things that they had once rejected because they don't have long-term memory. Yeah. And this brings me to the second part of your question regarding speaking the language of our surrounding culture. Yes, we need to understand what's going on around us, but we need to understand it critically. And we can only maintain critical distance with our culture while interacting with contemporary culture if we have a clear understanding of our own ecclesial identity that's formed by a continuing, dynamic, living tradition. Concern for relevance without knowing who we are as the people of God is suicidal. We end up capitulating to the spirit of the age, to whatever happens to be fashionable. I think some time ago, way back, I think in the 70s, Marshall McLuhan reminds us that the medium is the message, right? The medium we employ carries with it an implicit message. And therefore, whatever contemporary medium we use and that we engage in, we need to engage it very critically. Yeah. Just to give an example, I'm very worried when some evangelicals are arguing that since people are better connected digitally, to be relevant, let's have a digital church. I know that under extenuating circumstances like what we are in now, the pandemic, online services and meetings may be unavoidable. Some digital platforms are actually quite helpful for certain functions, like conferencing over space and time, something like what we are doing now. But to talk about online church or online worship, that cannot be the norm, because a church is an embodied reality, the body of Christ. And in fact, the church is better defined as the body of Christ, in a locality. In fact, in the New Testament, there are far more references to the local church, the church in a locality, than about the church universal. The local church is not just a segment of a larger church. In fact, we could call the local church itself the whole church, in the way in which the word Catholic with a small c is understood. According to the whole, the local church is the Catholic Church. To be church is to be engaged in a very physical act of eating and drinking together in the Holy Sacrament, or in the holding of hands in holy matrimony. These are the kind of things that we do within a local context. And there's no substitute for something like this online. If I may use a rather crude analogy to illustrate my point, there are some people who claim that online sex gives them a great deal of satisfaction too. I will point out that whatever emotional satisfaction it brings, it cannot produce babies. So to talk about an online church as some kind of the new norm, I think is a capitulation to modern culture and a failure to recognize what it means to be the church of word and sacrament. And I think that a lot is at stake when people start to normalize the digital church.
This is really relevant for the present scenario, because I have encountered this myself when COVID happened and everything was closed and people were doing church on Zoom or Skype, whatever they were using. But then people got back, and many people could not pinpoint why, but they were saying there was something missing. I don't know why, but I just would rather have this after a year of just being home. And what you've said makes so much sense. That even though what you're calling for is going to the fundamentals, going to our history, and finding the essence of who we are. In some ways, that is what makes us truly relevant and speaks to the deep need that is there within. Not by trying to chase the latest trend or latest way of being relevant,